The morning fog hung thick over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado like a shroud of mystery, but nothing could hide the tension crackling through the air at the Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL training compound. Inside the briefing room, a circle of the Navy's most elite instructors sat in stunned silence, their weathered faces bearing expressions of defeat that seemed impossible for men who had never known the meaning of surrender. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, a 23-year veteran whose chest bore more ribbons than a 4th of July parade, slowly shook his head as he stared at the folder in his hands. The folder contained the training records of Class 347, and those records told a story that defied everything these instructors thought they knew about human limits. For the first time in the storied history of BUDS training, not one, not two, but 7 different instructors had requested transfers rather than continue working with a particular trainee. "I've been doing this for over 2 decades, Tank muttered, his voice gravelly from years of shouting orders across obstacle courses and through the surf. "I've broken down Marines, Rangers, Green Berets. Hell, I've made grown men cry for their mothers. But this," he tapped the folder with a thick finger, "this is something else entirely." The woman they were discussing sat alone in the adjacent ready room, her back ramrod straight despite having completed what should have been an impossible series of training exercises. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had arrived at Coronado 6 months ago with credentials that read like fiction. MIT graduate with a PhD in applied physics, former Army Ranger with combat deployments in Afghanistan, and holder of multiple civilian endurance records. On paper, she was exactly what the Navy wanted in their elite SEAL program. In reality, she had become something far more complex, a puzzle that none of these seasoned warriors could solve. What made Sarah different wasn't her academic achievements or even her military background. It was something deeper, something that seemed to tap into reserves of determination that went beyond normal human capacity. Where other candidates would break, she would adapt. Where they would quit, she would innovate. Where they would accept defeat, she would find angles of attack that her instructors had never considered. The problems had started during Hell Week, that infamous 132-hour crucible designed to separate the truly committed from those who merely thought they wanted to be SEALs. Sarah had not only completed every exercise, but had done so while helping other candidates who were struggling. When Instructor Williams had tried to break her spirit by forcing her to carry extra weight during the log PT exercises, she had redistributed the weight using principles of physics that actually made the entire team more efficient. When Master Chief Peterson had attempted to overwhelm her during the dreaded surf torture, where candidates lie in the freezing Pacific surf until hypothermia forces them to quit, Sarah had used meditation techniques combined with controlled breathing to maintain her core temperature longer than candidates who outweighed her by 70 pounds. But it wasn't just her physical capabilities that unnerved the instructors. It was her mental approach to every challenge. "She thinks like a damn computer," complained Instructor Williams, a former Delta Force operator whose intimidation techniques had sent hundreds of would-be SEALs packing. But Chief Rodriguez knew it was more complicated than that. He had studied the video footage of Sarah's training sessions, and what he saw wasn't robotic efficiency. It was something that reminded him of the ancient samurai warriors he had read about, a perfect fusion of mental discipline and physical capability that transcended normal training methods. The real breaking point had come during the advanced combat training phase, specifically in the Kill House, a sophisticated training facility designed to simulate real-world combat scenarios. The Kill House was where SEAL candidates learned to operate in the most dangerous environments imaginable, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, success, and catastrophic failure. For weeks, Sarah had excelled in every scenario thrown at her. Whether it was hostage rescue, building clearing, or high-value target elimination, she approached each challenge with a methodical precision that achieved perfect results. Her accuracy with weapons was beyond exceptional, her tactical thinking was innovative, and her ability to adapt to changing circumstances was unprecedented. But it was during a particularly complex scenario, one designed to test candidates' responses to complete mission failure, that something extraordinary happened. The scenario was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Infiltrate a defended position, neutralize multiple hostiles, rescue a civilian, and extract safely. But what the candidates didn't know was that the scenario was rigged to be impossible. Every route was blocked, every tactical advantage was eliminated, and every conventional approach led to failure. Previous classes had spent hours attempting the scenario, with even the most exceptional candidates eventually accepting defeat. It was designed to teach humility and the importance of knowing when to abort a mission. But Sarah had done something unprecedented. She had succeeded. Not only had she completed the impossible scenario, but she had done so using tactics that none of the instructors had ever seen before. She had turned the facility's own defensive measures against itself, used environmental factors that the designers hadn't considered, and employed a level of three-dimensional thinking that had left the observing instructor speechless.
That's when the requests for transfers had started coming in.
The morning after Sarah's impossible victory in the kill house, the atmosphere at the Bud/S compound had shifted dramatically. Word of what she had accomplished spread through the base like wildfire, creating ripples that reached far beyond the confines of Naval Special Warfare Command. Phone calls were made to Pentagon offices, emails flew between high-ranking officials, and suddenly, Sarah Chen wasn't just another SEAL candidate. She had become a case study that challenged everything the military thought it knew about human potential. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the first woman to oversee naval special warfare operations, arrived at Coronado unannounced at 0600 hours. Her presence alone was enough to send shockwaves through the command structure. But when she requested a private briefing about the Chen situation, everyone knew that Sarah's training had transcended normal channels and entered the realm of strategic importance. In the secure briefing room, Admiral Hayes reviewed the footage of Sarah's kill house performance with the intensity of a chess master studying a grandmaster's game. The scenario that had been specifically designed to be unsolvable had been dismantled piece by piece through a combination of tactical brilliance, physical capability, and mental fortitude that defied conventional understanding. "Show me the part where she bypasses the motion sensors," the Admiral commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of military politics and special operations. Chief Rodriguez rewound the footage to show Sarah's approach to what should have been an impenetrable security barrier. The motion sensors were positioned to create overlapping fields of detection, making invisible passage theoretically impossible. Standard doctrine would have required either accepting detection or finding an alternative route. Instead, Sarah had done something unprecedented. Using her knowledge of physics and the specific frequency patterns of the motion sensors, she had created a timing sequence that exploited microsecond gaps in the sensor coverage. Moving with precision that would have made a Swiss watchmaker jealous, she had threaded the needle through detection fields that existed in spaces smaller than her own body profile. "That's not luck," Admiral Hayes observed, making notes in her ever-present tactical notebook. "That's not even exceptional training. That's genius-level spatial reasoning combined with perfect kinesthetic control." But the motion sensors were just the beginning. The kill house scenario had been designed with multiple layers of impossibility, each one building upon the last to create a situation where failure wasn't just likely, it was mathematically certain. Sarah had encountered armed opponents positioned at choke points that provided perfect crossfire coverage, environmental hazards that forced movement through predetermined kill zones, and time constraints that made careful planning impossible. Her solution had been to redefine the entire tactical problem. Instead of accepting the limitations imposed by the scenario designers, she had identified assumptions built into the exercise and systematically overturned them. When faced with opponents in fixed positions, she had used the facility's ventilation system to approach from angles that weren't covered by their defensive positioning. When environmental hazards forced movement through kill zones, she had created her own environmental factors, using smoke grenades in combination with the facility's fire suppression system to generate concealment where none had existed before. When time constraints made planning impossible, she had developed the ability to perform complex tactical calculations in real time, adapting her strategy continuously as new information became available. The rescue portion of the scenario had presented its own unique challenges. The civilian hostage was positioned in a room with only one entrance, surrounded by multiple armed opponents with overlapping fields of fire. Previous candidates who had made it this far had either attempted frontal assaults that resulted in simulated casualties or had spent so much time planning that they exceeded the time limit. Sarah had approached the problem from an entirely different direction. Using her knowledge of building construction and structural engineering, she had identified that the room's placement within the facility created an opportunity that the scenario designers hadn't considered. By creating a carefully controlled breach through what appeared to be a load-bearing wall, she had opened a new entrance that bypassed all defensive positions while maintaining the structural integrity of the building. The execution had been flawless, moving through her improvised entrance with speed and precision that left observers stunned. She had neutralized all opponents before they could react to her presence. The hostage rescue had been completed without a single simulated casualty, and her extraction had been accomplished using a route that completely avoided the facility's primary defensive measures. "How long did she take to complete the entire scenario?" Admiral Hayes asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 14 minutes and 37 seconds, Chief Rodriguez replied, the disbelief still evident in his voice. The previous record for even attempting all phases of the scenario was 28 minutes, and that candidate failed at the hostage rescue phase. What made Sarah's performance even more remarkable was the manner in which she had accomplished it. There had been no desperate improvisation, no lucky breaks, no moments where success hung on the edge of chance. Every movement was calculated, every decision was optimal, and every technique was executed with precision that suggested not just exceptional training, but an intuitive understanding of combat that typically took decades to develop. The psychological evaluations that followed her Kill House triumph had raised even more questions. Standard post-exercise interviews were designed to assess stress responses, decision-making processes, and emotional stability under pressure. Sarah's responses had been so analytically precise and emotionally balanced that the evaluating psychologists had initially suspected she was suppressing traumatic stress responses. Further testing had revealed something unprecedented. Sarah appeared to process high-stress combat situations without experiencing the typical physiological and psychological markers associated with extreme stress. Her heart rate remained stable, her cognitive functions remained sharp, and her emotional state remained balanced even during the most intense phases of training. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the base's chief psychologist, had conducted multiple sessions with Sarah trying to understand how someone could maintain such equilibrium under conditions that routinely broke down even the most psychologically prepared candidates. "She doesn't experience stress," Dr. Martinez explained to Admiral Hayes. "It's that she's developed mental frameworks that allow her to channel stress into enhanced performance rather than degraded function. She treats each challenge as a complex problem to be solved rather than a threat to be survived." But there was something else, something that Dr. Martinez found even more intriguing. Sarah's approach to training wasn't driven by the typical motivations that brought people to SEAL training. She wasn't trying to prove herself, she wasn't seeking validation, and she wasn't driven by a need to overcome personal limitations. Instead, she seemed to approach each challenge with genuine intellectual curiosity, as if she were conducting research rather than undergoing military training. She asked me yesterday about the psychological profiles of previous candidates who had failed at various stages, not because she was worried about her own performance, but because she wanted to understand the mental frameworks that led to those failures. She's studying the training process itself, looking for ways to optimize not just her own performance, but the performance of future candidates. This revelation had profound implications that went far beyond Sarah's individual training progress. If her approaches could be understood and systematized, it might be possible to dramatically improve the success rates of SEAL training overall. The military invests enormous resources in candidate selection and training, but even the most promising candidates have high failure rates during the most challenging phases of BUDS. Admiral Hayes closed the file and looked directly at Chief Rodriguez. I want to speak with her personally. Set up a meeting for this afternoon and make sure we're not interrupted.
The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Coronado compound as Admiral Hayes prepared for what would prove to be one of the most unusual conversations of her distinguished career. Sarah Chen sat across from her in the Admiral's temporary office, her posture reflecting the perfect balance between military bearing and relaxed confidence. There was something in her eyes, a depth of focus that suggested she was simultaneously present in the moment and calculating possibilities several moves ahead. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Hayes began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had navigated the highest levels of military command, "I've reviewed your training records, and I have to say, what you've accomplished here challenges some fundamental assumptions about human capability under extreme stress." Sarah's response was measured and thoughtful. "Thank you, Admiral. If I may, I think what I've accomplished is less about exceptional individual capability and more about applying systematic approaches to problems that are typically solved through intuition and experience alone." This answer revealed something that Admiral Hayes found fascinating. Sarah wasn't displaying the ego or bravado that often accompanied exceptional performance. Instead, she was demonstrating the kind of analytical mindset that suggested she understood her achievements within a broader context of human potential and systematic improvement. "Tell me about your approach to the kill house scenario," Admiral Hayes requested. "Our instructors have been running variations of that exercise for years, and no one has ever come close to your level of success." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more animated as she began to describe her tactical thinking. The key insight was recognizing that the scenario was designed around assumptions about how candidates would approach the problem. Most military training emphasizes adapting to circumstances rather than changing the circumstances themselves. She paused to gather her thoughts before continuing. "But in real-world operations, the most successful missions often involve creating new tactical possibilities, rather than working within the constraints that enemies expect you to accept. The kill house scenario was designed to be impossible within conventional tactical frameworks, but it became solvable once I started questioning those frameworks themselves." Admiral Hayes found herself impressed not just by Sarah's tactical thinking, but by her ability to articulate complex concepts in clear, understandable terms. "Give me a specific example of how you changed the tactical framework." The motion sensor bypass was a perfect illustration. Conventional approach would be to find a route that avoided the sensors or accept that detection was inevitable. But the sensors were operating on specific frequency patterns and timing sequences that created microscopic gaps in coverage. She gestured with her hands to illustrate the concept. By analyzing the mathematical relationships between the different sensor arrays, I was able to identify timing windows that existed in spaces smaller than normal human movement patterns. Instead of trying to avoid the sensors, I synchronized my movement with their operational rhythms. What impressed Admiral Hayes even more was Sarah's awareness of the broader implications of her approach. "The technique I used could be systematized and taught to other candidates. It's not dependent on exceptional physical capabilities or intuitive genius. It's based on understanding the mathematical principles that govern electronic surveillance systems." This perspective revealed something crucial about Sarah's mindset. She wasn't content with personal success. She was thinking about how her methods could be applied to improve overall military effectiveness. This kind of strategic thinking was exactly what the Navy needed in its special operations community. "Let's talk about your background," Admiral Hayes continued. "Your academic credentials are impressive, but what brought you from MIT to military service?" Sarah's expression became more serious, reflecting a depth of conviction that went beyond career ambition. "I grew up in a military family. My father served 3 tours in Iraq as a combat engineer, and I saw firsthand how technological understanding could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures." She paused, her gaze becoming distant as she recalled formative experiences. During his second deployment, his unit encountered improvised explosive devices that were more sophisticated than they had trained against. The solutions came from combining military tactics with advanced engineering principles, but that integration happened in the field under life-or-death pressure. Admiral Hayes nodded, understanding how personal experience often shaped the most dedicated military professionals. "You wanted to be part of developing those solutions proactively rather than reactively." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "The most challenging problems facing modern military operations exist at the intersection of multiple disciplines: physics, engineering, psychology, tactical operations, and advanced technology. Traditional military training develops expertise in specific areas, but the most complex challenges require integration across all those domains." This conversation was revealing something that Admiral Hayes found both exciting and strategically significant. Sarah represented a new type of military professional, someone who could operate at the highest levels of tactical execution while maintaining the analytical capabilities to understand and improve the systems that supported military operations. "Your psychological evaluations indicate that you process stress differently than most candidates. Our psychologists are intrigued by your ability to maintain optimal performance under conditions that typically degrade cognitive function." Sarah smiled slightly, the first time during the conversation that she had shown anything resembling emotional expression. "I think that's related to how I conceptualize challenging situations. Most people experience stress when they feel their circumstances are beyond their control. But every challenging situation contains variables that can be influenced through understanding and appropriate action." She leaned back in her chair, becoming more reflective. "When I approach a difficult scenario, I'm not thinking about whether I can survive it or whether I'm strong enough to overcome it. I'm analyzing the system dynamics that create the challenge and identifying the leverage points where small actions can produce large effects." This explanation provided crucial insight into Sarah's psychological resilience. She had developed mental frameworks that transformed potentially overwhelming challenges into complex but solvable problems. Instead of being paralyzed by difficulty, she was energized by the opportunity to apply systematic thinking to achieve optimal outcomes. Admiral Hayes realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in her decades of military experience. Sarah represented the emergence of a new type of warrior, one who combined the physical and mental toughness required for special operations with the analytical capabilities typically found in advanced research environments. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you," Admiral Hayes said, her tone becoming more formal. "Your performance here has attracted attention at the highest levels of military command. There are people in Washington who believe that your approaches could revolutionize how we think about special operations training and execution." Sarah's response demonstrated both humility and strategic awareness. "I'm honored by that recognition, Admiral, but I think the most important thing is continuing to develop and refine these approaches through practical application. The real test isn't what I can accomplish in training scenarios, but how these methods perform in actual operational environments." The conversation had revealed something that Admiral Hayes found both inspiring and strategically crucial. Sarah wasn't just an exceptional individual performer. She was a systems thinker who understood how individual capabilities could be leveraged to improve overall military effectiveness. This kind of strategic thinking was exactly what the Navy needed as it faced increasingly complex global challenges. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Hayes made a decision that would have profound implications for Sarah's future and for the evolution of special operations training. The next phase of Sarah's development would take her beyond the controlled environment of training scenarios into the uncertain realm of real-world operations, where her theoretical frameworks would face the ultimate test of practical application.
3 weeks after Admiral Hayes' visit to Coronado, Sarah found herself aboard a C-130 transport aircraft flying through the darkness toward a destination that didn't officially exist on any military maps. The mission briefing had been unlike anything she had experienced during her training, sparse on details, heavy on implications, and carrying the kind of weight that suggested failure would have consequences far beyond personal disappointment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sitting across from her in the aircraft's cargo bay was Commander Jake Morrison, a 20-year veteran of SEAL Team 6, whose weathered face and calculating eyes spoke of missions that would never appear in official records. Morrison had been handpicked by Admiral Hayes to oversee Sarah's transition from training scenarios to operational reality, and his reputation suggested that he was not someone who accepted anything less than perfection. "This isn't a graduation exercise, Chen." Morrison's voice cut through the aircraft's engine noise with military precision. "What we're heading into is a real-world situation that our best intelligence analysts can't fully understand. 3 different special operations teams have attempted to resolve this situation over the past 6 months, and each mission has ended in what the Pentagon is calling inconclusive results." The mission parameters were unlike anything Sarah had encountered in her training. A high-value intelligence asset had gone missing in a region where traditional military operations were politically impossible. The asset possessed information that could prevent a terrorist attack on American soil, but recovering her required infiltrating a facility that seemed to adapt and evolve its security measures in response to each rescue attempt. "The target facility is some kind of research complex," Morrison continued, spreading satellite photographs across the aircraft's fold-down table. "Our intelligence suggests it's being used by a group that has access to military-grade equipment and tactical training that rivals our own capabilities. But here's what makes this particularly interesting. After each failed rescue attempt, the facility's defensive measures have become more sophisticated." Sarah studied the photographs with the intensity of someone solving a complex mathematical equation. The facility appeared to be a converted industrial complex, surrounded by what looked like conventional security barriers, but the intelligence report suggested something far more complex was hidden beneath the surface. The first team tried a direct assault approach, standard infiltration and extraction protocols. They penetrated the outer perimeter, but encountered defensive measures that weren't visible in our reconnaissance. Electronic countermeasures that disabled their communications, automated defensive systems that seemed to predict their tactical movements, and environmental obstacles that appeared to be dynamically configured. Sarah looked up from the photographs, her analytical mind already working through the implications. "You're describing adaptive defensive systems, security measures that learn from previous attacks and modify their responses accordingly." "That's exactly what our analysts concluded," Morrison confirmed. "The second team tried a more sophisticated approach, using advanced electronic warfare capabilities to disable what they thought were the primary defensive systems. They got further than the first team, but encountered countermeasures that seemed specifically designed to defeat their particular technological advantages." The pattern was becoming clear to Sarah. Each rescue attempt had been analyzed by whoever was controlling the facility, and defensive measures had been modified to specifically counter the methods used in previous missions. This wasn't just sophisticated security, it was adaptive security that learned and evolved in real time. The third team took a completely different approach. Psychological operations combined with long-term surveillance and infiltration. They spent weeks mapping the facility's routines and identifying potential weaknesses. When they finally executed their mission, they discovered that the facility had been modified to counter exactly the kind of long-term surveillance they had been conducting.
Sarah absorbed this information with growing fascination. The situation presented a challenge that went beyond conventional military tactics or even advanced special operations. Whoever was controlling this facility had developed defensive capabilities that could adapt faster than traditional military planning cycles. "What makes you think I can succeed where 3 previous teams have failed?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand why she had been selected for this mission. Morrison's expression became more serious, reflecting the weight of strategic decisions made at the highest levels of military command. "Because your approach to problem solving doesn't follow conventional patterns. Every previous team has tried to overcome the facility's defenses through superior firepower, advanced technology, or more sophisticated tactics. You've demonstrated the ability to redefine the fundamental parameters of tactical problems." The aircraft began its descent toward what Sarah assumed was a forward operating base, hidden somewhere in hostile territory. Through the small windows, she could see landscape that looked desolate and unforgiving, the perfect environment for operations that required complete secrecy and absolute success. As the aircraft touched down on what appeared to be an improvised airstrip, Sarah realized that her training at Coronado had been preparation for exactly this kind of situation. The controlled scenarios and impossible exercises had been designed to develop not just tactical capabilities, but the kind of analytical thinking that could succeed in environments where conventional approaches failed. "Your mission parameters are unusual," Morrison explained as they gathered their equipment. "You have complete tactical autonomy, no predetermined approach, no required methods, no standard operating procedures. The only requirement is success. Recover the asset and exit safely." Sarah understood that this level of operational freedom was both an opportunity and a tremendous responsibility. Without the constraints of conventional tactics, she could apply the same systematic thinking that had revolutionized her training performance. But without the safety net of controlled scenarios, failure would have consequences that extended far beyond her own survival. The forward operating base was a testament to military efficiency under extreme conditions. Hidden in a natural depression that provided concealment from aerial surveillance, the facility contained everything necessary to support complex operations in hostile territory. Sarah noted the advanced communications equipment, sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities, and weapons systems that suggested this mission had the full support of the most elite military resources. "Your target facility is approximately 40 kilometers northeast of here," Morrison briefed Sarah in the base's secure communications center. "Current intelligence indicates that the asset will be held in the facility's central building, but our information about internal layout and defensive measures is limited." Sarah studied the real-time surveillance feeds showing the target facility. Even from a distance, she could see that the complex was far more sophisticated than the satellite photographs had suggested. The buildings were arranged in patterns that suggested careful tactical planning, and the surrounding terrain had been modified in ways that would channelize approaching forces into predetermined zones. "What kind of timeline are we working with?" Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to formulate approaches that would require careful timing and precise execution. "Intelligence indicates that the asset will be moved to a different location within 72 hours. After that, recovering her becomes exponentially more difficult. This facility represents our best opportunity to complete the mission successfully." As Sarah prepared for what would be the most challenging operation of her career, she realized that everything she had learned during her training was about to be tested in an environment where theoretical frameworks would encounter the unpredictable reality of combat operations. The analytical approaches that had seemed revolutionary in controlled scenarios would now face the ultimate validation of practical application. But more than that, she understood that this mission represented something larger than individual tactical success. The methods she had developed during training could potentially revolutionize how special operations were conducted, but only if they proved effective in real-world applications where the stakes couldn't be higher.
The pre-dawn darkness provided perfect concealment as Sarah conducted her initial reconnaissance of the target facility. From her observation position nearly 2 kilometers away, she could see that the intelligence briefings had understated the complexity of what she was facing. The facility wasn't just defended, It was designed as an integrated defensive system where every element served multiple tactical purposes. Using the advanced optics provided by the forward operating base, Sarah began mapping the facility's defensive measures with the systematic precision that had characterized her training performance. But instead of simply cataloging obvious security features, she was analyzing the underlying logic that governed how the defenses were arranged and integrated. The outer perimeter consisted of what appeared to be conventional razor wire and motion sensors. But Sarah's analysis revealed something more sophisticated. The sensor placement created overlapping coverage patterns that were mathematically optimized to detect traditional infiltration approaches while simultaneously channeling potential intruders toward areas where additional defensive measures would be most effective. "They're not just trying to keep people out," Sarah whispered into her communications device, reporting her observations to Morrison at the forward operating base. "They're trying to control how people attempt to get in." This insight was crucial because it revealed the fundamental flaw in previous rescue attempts. Each team had focused on overcoming specific defensive measures without recognizing that the entire facility was designed to manipulate tactical decision-making. The defenses weren't just barriers, they were psychological tools that encouraged attackers to make predictable choices. Sarah's analysis of the facility's electronic signatures revealed another layer of sophistication. The complex was generating electromagnetic patterns that suggested advanced computing capabilities far beyond what would be necessary for basic security operations. Someone was running real-time tactical analysis programs that could model different attack scenarios and optimize defensive responses accordingly. "The facility is learning," Sarah reported to Morrison. "Every time a potential threat approaches, the system analyzes their behavior patterns and updates its defensive algorithms. That's why each previous team encountered countermeasures that seemed specifically designed for their particular approaches." This understanding allowed Sarah to develop a completely different tactical framework. Instead of trying to overcome the facility's defenses, she would exploit the system's adaptive capabilities by feeding it false information and manipulating its analytical processes. The key was to make the defensive system optimize for the wrong threat profile. Over the course of 6 hours, Sarah conducted what appeared to be reconnaissance for a large-scale assault involving multiple teams and heavy equipment. She moved through positions that would be optimal for placing communications equipment, identified locations that would be necessary for coordinating complex operations, and displayed behavior patterns that suggested extensive advanced planning. The facility's response was exactly what Sarah had predicted. Electronic surveillance systems focused on areas where large teams would deploy. Motion sensors were recalibrated to detect multiple personnel moving in coordinated patterns. And defensive positions were optimized for engagement with conventional military units. While the facility systems optimized for large-scale conventional assault, Sarah was actually preparing for something completely different. Her real infiltration plan exploited gaps in coverage that were created when the defensive systems focused on more obvious threats. By understanding how the facility's adaptive algorithms prioritized different types of threats, she could move through areas that the system had deprioritized. As the sun began to set, Sarah initiated the most challenging phase of her mission. Her approach route took advantage of natural terrain features that provided concealment from direct observation while avoiding areas where the facility's sensors were concentrated. But more importantly, her movement patterns were designed to reinforce the system's incorrect assessment of the threat profile. The motion sensors detected movement consistent with advanced scouts for a larger operation. The electronic surveillance systems identified communication patterns that suggested coordination with off-site tactical teams. The facility's analytical programs concluded that they were facing a conventional military operation and optimized their defensive posture accordingly. Sarah's actual infiltration route took her through areas that the defensive system had classified as low priority because they didn't fit the profile of conventional military approaches.
Moving with precision that would have been impossible without her advanced training, she bypassed sensor networks that were focused on detecting larger groups and avoided defensive positions that were optimized for engaging conventional forces. The facility's outer perimeter was more complex than satellite surveillance had indicated. Beyond the obvious barriers were sophisticated ground sensors that could detect footsteps, body heat signatures, and even the electromagnetic signatures of modern electronic devices. But Sarah's analysis had identified the mathematical relationships between different sensor arrays, allowing her to move through coverage gaps that existed for only microseconds at a time. Her approach to the main building required navigating what amounted to an electronic maze where detection meant not just mission failure, but potentially triggering automated defensive systems that could eliminate threats before human operators even realized they existed. Sarah's solution was to use the facility's own analytical processes against itself. By carrying electronic devices that generated signatures consistent with maintenance personnel rather than tactical operatives, and by moving in patterns that matched routine activities rather than infiltration approaches, Sarah convinced the facility's analytical systems that she represented a low-priority administrative presence rather than a tactical threat. The building's interior presented new challenges that tested every aspect of her training. The layout had been designed to confuse intruders while channeling them toward areas where defensive measures would be most effective. Corridors led to dead ends that were actually kill zones, doorways opened to rooms that were monitored by sophisticated surveillance systems, and even the lighting was designed to degrade night vision capabilities. But Sarah's methodical approach to navigation allowed her to map the building's layout using principles of architectural logic rather than trial and error. By understanding how buildings were typically designed for defensive purposes, she could predict where the real operational areas would be located and identify routes that avoided the most heavily monitored zones. The intelligence asset, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, was being held in the section of the facility that appeared to be both heavily secured and isolated from the main operational areas. Sarah's analysis suggested that Dr. Park's location was chosen not just for security, but to minimize the risk that rescue operations could gather intelligence about the facility's primary functions. Sarah's approach to the holding area required bypassing security measures that had been specifically configured to defeat the tactics used by previous rescue teams. Electronic locks had been programmed to resist both physical manipulation and electronic override techniques. Motion sensors had been calibrated to detect even the most sophisticated stealth approaches, and human guards were positioned in patterns that provided overlapping coverage of all apparent approach routes. But Sarah's solution exploited something that the facility's designers hadn't anticipated: the assumption that rescue operations would focus exclusively on reaching the target location. Instead of trying to bypass the security measures protecting Dr. Park's location, Sarah temporarily disabled the facility's primary analytical systems by overloading them with false information. Using electronic devices that could generate thousands of simultaneous false signals, Sarah convinced the facility's defensive systems that they were under attack from multiple directions by teams using different tactical approaches. The analytical programs became overwhelmed trying to optimize defensive responses for contradictory threat profiles, creating windows of confusion during which the most sophisticated security measures became less effective. During one of these windows, Sarah reached Dr. Park's location and discovered something that would prove crucial for her extraction plan. Dr. Park wasn't just an intelligence asset. She was a computer systems analyst who understood how the facility's defensive measures operated. Her knowledge would be essential for safely extracting from a facility that was designed to prevent exactly what Sarah was attempting. "You're not what I expected," Dr. Park whispered as Sarah worked to free her from sophisticated restraints that were designed to prevent both escape attempts and rescue operations. Neither is this facility, Sarah replied, her focus entirely on the complex extraction that lay ahead. But I think between your knowledge of their systems and my approach to tactical problems, we can get out of here safely. The collaboration between Sarah's tactical capabilities and Dr. Park's technical knowledge would prove to be the key to successfully completing what 3 previous teams had failed to accomplish.
The extraction phase of the mission proved to be even more challenging than Sarah had anticipated, but the addition of Dr. Park's technical expertise created opportunities that would have been impossible for a conventional rescue team. As they moved through the facility's interior, Dr. Park provided real-time intelligence about security systems that weren't visible to standard reconnaissance methods. The facility's defensive algorithms are designed around the assumption that rescue teams will try to retrace their infiltration routes. Dr. Park explained in hushed tones as they navigated corridors that seemed to shift their configuration in response to their presence. But there are maintenance pathways that the analytical systems don't monitor as closely because they're not considered tactically relevant. Sarah immediately understood the implications of this information. The facility's designers had created blind spots in their own security by focusing exclusively on tactical threats while overlooking administrative vulnerabilities. These maintenance pathways represented a completely different approach to extraction, one that no previous rescue team would have considered because it required detailed knowledge of the facility's internal operations. "Show me," Sarah whispered, her mind already adapting her extraction plan to incorporate this unexpected advantage. Dr. Park led them through a concealed access panel that opened onto a network of service tunnels running beneath the facility's main operational areas. These tunnels were designed for maintenance personnel and building systems, but they also provided movement routes that bypassed the majority of the facility's sophisticated security measures. As they moved through the tunnels, Dr. Park continued providing crucial intelligence about the facility's capabilities and vulnerabilities. The reason previous rescue attempts failed wasn't just because of the adaptive defenses. The facility is run by a group that includes former special operations personnel from multiple countries. They understand military tactics because they've been trained in them. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of what they were facing. The facility wasn't just defended by sophisticated technology, it was protected by people who understood exactly how special operations teams thought and operated. Previous rescue attempts had failed because they were essentially fighting against their own tactical doctrines turned inside out. "But there's something they don't understand," Sarah replied, her confidence growing as the tactical picture became clearer. "They're optimizing their defenses based on conventional military thinking. They expect rescue teams to approach problems the way they were trained to approach them." The service tunnels led to a central mechanical room where the facility's primary systems converged. Dr. Park's knowledge of the facility's operations allowed her to identify which systems were essential for maintaining the defensive measures and which ones could be safely disrupted without triggering massive security responses. "If we can create the right kind of system failure," Dr. Park explained, while examining a complex array of computer terminals and mechanical systems, "we can make their defensive measures work against each other instead of protecting the facility." Sarah immediately understood what Dr. Park was proposing. Instead of trying to overcome the facility's defenses through superior force or more sophisticated technology, they could manipulate the defensive systems to create internal conflicts that would degrade overall security effectiveness. Working together with precision that demonstrated both Sarah's tactical expertise and Dr. Park's technical knowledge, they initiated a series of carefully coordinated system modifications. Dr. Park used her understanding of the facility's computer networks to introduce contradictory instructions into the defensive algorithms, while Sarah positioned herself to exploit the tactical opportunities that would be created when the systems began conflicting with each other. The results exceeded their most optimistic expectations. The facility's motion sensors began detecting threats that didn't exist while ignoring actual movement in critical areas. Electronic surveillance systems focused on empty rooms while losing track of real security concerns. Automated defensive measures activated in response to false alarms while leaving genuine vulnerabilities unprotected.
The whole system is trying to optimize for multiple contradictory threat profiles simultaneously, Dr. Park observed with satisfaction as they monitored the chaos unfolding throughout the facility. It's like trying to solve equations that have no solutions. The processing power required is overwhelming their analytical capabilities. This systematic degradation of the facility's defensive measures created exactly the kind of extraction opportunity that Sarah needed. With the security systems effectively disabled by their own contradictory programming, she and Dr. Park could move through areas that would normally be impossible to access without detection. But even with the facility's electronic defenses compromised, they still faced human opponents who would eventually realize what was happening and adapt their tactics accordingly. Sarah knew that their window of opportunity was limited, and that successful extraction would require moving quickly while the confusion persisted. Their route to the facility's perimeter took them through areas where previous rescue teams had encountered the heaviest resistance. But with the electronic surveillance systems providing false information and the motion sensors detecting non-existent threats, the human defenders were responding to situations that didn't match reality. Sarah observed security personnel rushing to respond to alarms in empty buildings while leaving critical areas undermanned. Guard posts were abandoned as personnel deployed to investigate threats that existed only in the facility's corrupted analytical systems. The entire defensive posture was collapsing under the weight of contradictory information and impossible tactical requirements. This is what happens when you relied too heavily on automated systems, Sarah noted, as they moved through corridors that should have been heavily defended but were instead nearly empty. Dr. Park's technical expertise proved invaluable as they approached the facility's outer perimeter. Her knowledge of the electronic systems allowed them to create additional diversions that kept security personnel focused on areas far from their actual location. By generating false signals that suggested multiple extraction teams were operating simultaneously, they convinced the facility's defenders that they were facing a large-scale operation rather than two individuals moving with surgical precision. The extraction itself was accomplished through a combination of tactical innovation and technical manipulation that would have been impossible for either Sarah or Dr. Park to achieve individually. Sarah's training provided the physical capabilities and strategic thinking necessary for moving through hostile territory undetected, while Dr. Park's knowledge of the facility's systems created opportunities that wouldn't have existed for conventional rescue operations. As they reached the extraction point where Commander Morrison waited for transportation back to the forward operating base, Sarah realized that the mission had validated not just her individual capabilities, but the entire approach to problem solving that had been developed during her training at Coronado. The key wasn't being stronger or faster or better equipped than the opposition. It was understanding the systemic relationships that governed how the facility operated and finding ways to use those relationships to our advantage. Dr. Park's debriefing provided additional intelligence that would prove crucial for future operations. Her detailed knowledge of how the facility's defensive measures had been designed and implemented offered insights into similar installations that might be encountered in future missions. But perhaps most importantly, the mission had demonstrated that the analytical approaches Sarah had developed could be successfully applied in real-world operational environments where the stakes couldn't be higher. The theoretical frameworks that had seemed revolutionary in training scenarios had proven effective when tested against sophisticated opposition under actual combat conditions. As the aircraft carried them away from hostile territory toward safety, Sarah understood that her success had implications far beyond this individual mission. The methods that had enabled her to succeed where 3 previous teams had failed could potentially transform how special operations were conducted, but only if those methods could be systematized and taught to other personnel. The challenge now would be developing training programs that could reliably produce operators capable of the same kind of systematic thinking that had made this mission successful. Sarah's individual capabilities were remarkable, but their real value lay in their potential for broader application across the special operations community. Commander Morrison's final assessment of the mission would prove prophetic. What Lieutenant Chen accomplished here isn't just about rescuing one intelligence asset, it's about proving that there are entirely new approaches to special operations that we're only beginning to understand.
6 months after the successful extraction of Dr. Park, Sarah found herself in an environment that was simultaneously familiar and completely alien. A classified facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert where the most advanced military training programs were developed and tested. The Pentagon had decided that Sarah's revolutionary approaches to special operations needed to be studied, systematized, and potentially integrated into the broader training curriculum for elite military units. The facility, known only by its designation, Advanced Tactical Development Center, represented the cutting edge of military science and human performance optimization. Here, the most talented individuals from every branch of the armed forces came to push the boundaries of what was considered possible in modern warfare. Sarah's presence at the facility was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. She was being asked to help revolutionize how the military thought about combat training and operational effectiveness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the facility's director, and a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned into military psychology and human performance research, greeted Sarah with a mixture of professional respect and intense curiosity. Lieutenant Chen, your performance at Coronado and your success in operational environments has created quite a stir in the defense community. We've been tasked with understanding exactly how your methods work and whether they can be replicated. The initial phase of Sarah's time at the facility involved comprehensive analysis of her training performance, operational success, and the underlying cognitive processes that enabled her exceptional capabilities. Teams of psychologists, tactical analysts, and human performance specialists conducted detailed studies of her decision-making patterns, stress responses, and analytical methodologies. What we're discovering is unprecedented, Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of their regular briefing sessions. Your approach to tactical problems demonstrates cognitive patterns that we've never seen in military personnel. You're processing information and generating solutions using mental frameworks that seem to integrate multiple disciplines simultaneously. The research revealed that Sarah's success wasn't based on any single exceptional capability, but rather on her ability to synthesize insights from physics, psychology, engineering, and tactical operations into unified approaches to complex problems. Where most military personnel were trained to excel within specific domains, Sarah had developed the ability to operate effectively across multiple domains simultaneously. The implications are staggering, Dr. Rodriguez continued. If we can understand how to develop these integrative capabilities in other personnel, we could potentially revolutionize military effectiveness across all operational domains. But the research also revealed challenges that would make replicating Sarah's capabilities far more complex than simply modifying existing training programs. Her analytical approaches required not just technical knowledge across multiple disciplines, but also the cognitive flexibility to rapidly shift between different conceptual frameworks depending on the tactical situation. The facilities training programs were designed to test whether Sarah's methods could be taught to other highly qualified military personnel. Groups of elite operators from various special operations units were brought to the facility to participate in experimental training programs that incorporated Sarah's systematic approaches to problem solving. The results were mixed but encouraging. Personnel who already possessed strong analytical capabilities were able to adopt modified versions of Sarah's methods and achieve significant improvements in their performance during complex training scenarios. However, developing the level of integrative thinking that Sarah demonstrated naturally required far more extensive training than traditional military programs provided. We're essentially trying to create Renaissance warriors, observed Colonel James Mitchell, the facility's chief tactical instructor and a former Delta Force commander. Personnel who can operate at the highest levels of military effectiveness while maintaining the intellectual capabilities of advanced researchers and analysts. Sarah's role at the facility evolved beyond simply being studied to actively participating in the development of new training methodologies. Her insights into how systematic thinking could be applied to tactical problems proved invaluable for creating educational programs that could accelerate the development of analytical capabilities in other personnel. Working with teams of educational specialists and cognitive scientists, Sarah helped design training scenarios that required participants to integrate knowledge from multiple disciplines in order to achieve successful outcomes. These scenarios were far more complex than traditional military exercises, but they also developed cognitive capabilities that proved applicable to a wide range of operational challenges. The key insight is that modern military operations are essentially complex systems problems. Success requires understanding not just tactics or technology or logistics individually, but how all these elements interact to create opportunities for achieving strategic objectives. One of the most significant developments during Sarah's time at the facility was the creation of what became known as integrated operations training, a new approach to military education that combined traditional tactical training with advanced analytical methodologies. Personnel who completed these programs demonstrated capabilities that exceeded traditional special operations training in multiple measurable ways. The success of these experimental training programs attracted attention from the highest levels of military command and government leadership. Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams made an unannounced visit to the facility to observe the training programs personally and assess their potential for broader implementation across the armed forces. "What I'm seeing here represents the future of military capability development," Secretary Williams observed after watching Sarah lead a group of special operations personnel through a complex training scenario that required integrating cyber warfare, traditional tactics, and advanced physics concepts. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that our military needs to maintain strategic superiority in an increasingly complex global environment. The training scenario that had impressed Secretary Williams involved a simulated hostage rescue in an environment where the hostage takers possessed advanced technology that could neutralize traditional military advantages. Successful completion required understanding how to use environmental factors, electronic warfare, psychological operations, and conventional tactics in coordinated ways that created new tactical possibilities. Sarah's team had solved the scenario by identifying that the hostage takers' advanced technology created electromagnetic signatures that could be exploited using principles from quantum physics. By creating specific types of interference patterns, they had been able to disable the hostile technology while simultaneously creating tactical opportunities that wouldn't have existed using conventional approaches. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that our military needs to maintain strategic superiority in an increasingly complex global environment, Secretary Williams continued. The threats we're facing require responses that integrate multiple capabilities in ways that our traditional training programs don't address. But the development of these advanced training programs also revealed new challenges that would need to be addressed before they could be implemented on a larger scale. The cognitive demands of integrated operations training were significantly higher than traditional military education, requiring longer training periods and more sophisticated educational methodologies. Additionally, not all personnel possessed the intellectual foundations necessary to benefit from these advanced programs. Success required a combination of analytical capabilities, cognitive flexibility, and creative thinking that was relatively rare even among elite military personnel. "We're essentially trying to select and develop a new type of military professional," Dr. Rodriguez explained to Secretary Williams. "Personnel who can operate at the intersection of multiple disciplines while maintaining the physical and mental toughness required for special operations." The facility's research had identified specific cognitive traits and educational backgrounds that predicted success in integrated operations training. Personnel with advanced education in technical fields, demonstrated analytical capabilities, and experience with complex problem solving were most likely to benefit from the new training methodologies. Sarah's role in developing selection criteria for advanced training programs drew on her understanding of how systematic thinking could be applied to human performance optimization. She worked with psychologists and assessment specialists to create evaluation methods that could identify personnel with the cognitive flexibility necessary for integrated operations training. The traditional military approach to personnel selection focuses on physical capabilities, psychological resilience, and tactical competence. But integrated operations require additional capabilities, the ability to think across disciplines, synthesize information from multiple sources, and generate innovative solutions to novel problems. The selection criteria that emerged from this research were more complex than traditional military assessment methods, but they also proved more effective at identifying personnel who could succeed in the most challenging operational environments. Personnel selected using these new criteria demonstrated significantly higher success rates in both training and operational applications. As Sarah's time at the Advanced Tactical Development Center progressed, she found herself increasingly involved in strategic planning for the future of military capability development. Her insights were being incorporated into long-term plans for transforming how the military recruited, trained, and deployed its most elite personnel. The implications of this transformation extended beyond special operations. The analytical methodologies that Sarah had developed were being adapted for application across multiple military domains, from logistics and intelligence analysis to strategic planning and technology development.
What Lieutenant Chen has accomplished represents the beginning of a fundamental evolution in military capability, Secretary Williams concluded during her visit to the facility. The methods being developed here will shape how our military operates for decades to come. The transformation of military training that had begun with Sarah's innovative approaches was about to face its ultimate test. Intelligence reports had identified a terrorist organization that was planning a coordinated attack on multiple targets using sophisticated technology and tactics that seemed specifically designed to counter traditional military responses. The organization appeared to have access to insider knowledge of military capabilities and standard operating procedures, making conventional countermeasures potentially ineffective. The White House Situation Room buzzed with tension as senior military leaders and intelligence officials struggled to develop a response strategy. The terrorist threat was unlike anything they had previously encountered, a hybrid organization that combined traditional terrorist tactics with advanced technology and what appeared to be military-grade training and planning capabilities. The intelligence indicates that this organization has been studying our special operations tactics and developing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize our traditional advantages, reported General Patricia Hayes, who had been promoted to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff following her successful oversight of naval special warfare operations. The briefing materials painted a disturbing picture of an adversary that seemed to understand American military capabilities better than most American personnel. The planned attacks were designed to exploit known vulnerabilities in security systems and use predictable response patterns against defending forces and create tactical situations where traditional military advantages would be minimized or eliminated entirely. They're essentially fighting us using our own tactical doctrines turned inside out, observed CIA Director Michael Torres. Every response we've modeled using standard procedures results in unacceptable casualties or mission failure. President Elizabeth Martinez listened to the briefings with growing concern. The terrorist threat represented exactly the kind of complex, adaptive challenge that traditional military responses were not designed to address. Success would require capabilities that went beyond conventional special operations towards something entirely new. What about the integrated operations training programs that have been developed at the Advanced Tactical Development Center? President Martinez asked. Are those capabilities ready for operational deployment? General Hayes exchanged glances with Secretary of Defense Williams before responding. The experimental training programs had shown remarkable results in controlled environments, but they had never been tested against real-world threats of this complexity and sophistication. The programs have demonstrated exceptional effectiveness in training scenarios, Madam President, but we're talking about deploying capabilities that are still largely experimental against an adversary that appears to have specifically prepared for conventional military responses. The room fell silent as the implications of the situation became clear. The military was facing a threat that could potentially succeed precisely because it had been designed to exploit the predictability of traditional military responses. Success would require approaches that the adversary hadn't anticipated and couldn't counter using their knowledge of conventional tactics. I want to speak with Lieutenant Chen personally, President Martinez decided. If these new capabilities represent our best option for preventing this attack, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of briefing the President of the United States on tactical capabilities that had never been operationally tested against adversaries of this sophistication. The weight of the responsibility was immense, but her analytical training allowed her to focus on the strategic requirements rather than the political implications. Madam President, the terrorist organization you're facing represents exactly the kind of adaptive threat that traditional military training doesn't prepare us for. They've studied our capabilities and developed countermeasures, but their preparations are based on assumptions about how we think and operate. President Martinez leaned forward, her attention completely focused on understanding the strategic options available. Explain how your approaches would be different. Sarah activated the briefing room's display systems to show tactical analyses that had been prepared specifically for this meeting. Traditional military approaches follow predictable patterns because they're based on doctrine that prioritizes reliability and coordination. But predictability becomes a vulnerability when facing adversaries who have studied those patterns. The displays showed comparative analyses of conventional tactical approaches versus the integrated operations methodologies that had been developed at the Advanced Tactical Development Center. The differences were striking. Where conventional approaches followed established procedures, integrated operations emphasized adaptive thinking and systematic innovation. The key advantage of integrated operations is that the solutions are generated dynamically based on the specific characteristics of each situation. Instead of applying predetermined tactics, we analyze the systemic relationships that create tactical opportunities and develop approaches that exploit those relationships. President Martinez studied the comparative analyses with the intensity of someone who understood that the wrong decision could result in catastrophic consequences. Give me a specific example of how this would work against the terrorist threat we're facing. Sarah highlighted sections of the intelligence reports that described the terrorists' planned tactics and technological capabilities. The terrorists are expecting us to respond with either direct military force or sophisticated technology-based countermeasures. They've prepared for both approaches by studying how our special operations units typically handle similar situations. The briefing materials showed that the terrorist organization had access to detailed information about American military tactics, equipment, and standard operating procedures. Their planned attacks were designed to create situations where conventional responses would either fail outright or succeed only at unacceptable cost. But they've prepared for conventional thinking, Sarah explained. Their countermeasures are based on assumptions about how military personnel are trained to approach tactical problems. If we apply integrated operations methodologies, we can generate solutions that fall outside their preparation framework. Sarah's analysis identified specific vulnerabilities in the terrorist organization's planning that could be exploited using approaches that combined traditional tactics with insights from other disciplines. The terrorists had prepared for military responses and technological countermeasures, but they hadn't anticipated responses that integrated both approaches with additional elements from psychology, physics, and systems analysis. The integrated approach would involve analyzing their operations as complex systems with multiple interdependent components. Instead of trying to defeat their individual capabilities, we would identify the systemic relationships that enable their overall operation and create cascade failures that disable their entire network. President Martinez asked pointed questions about the operational requirements, timeline constraints, and success probabilities associated with integrated operations. Approaches Sarah's responses demonstrated both confidence in the methodologies and realistic assessment of the challenges involved. The main risk is that we're deploying capabilities that haven't been tested against adversaries of this sophistication, Sarah admitted. But the main advantage is that our responses will be based on analytical frameworks that the adversaries haven't encountered and couldn't have prepared for. The briefing concluded with President Martinez making one of the most significant military decisions of her presidency. The terrorist threat was too sophisticated for conventional responses, but the integrated operations capabilities represented the best available option for preventing attacks that could result in massive casualties. I'm authorizing the deployment of integrated operations teams against this terrorist threat, President Martinez announced.
Lieutenant Chen, you'll lead the primary response team and have complete tactical autonomy to apply whatever methods you determine are most effective. The authorization represented both validation of the innovative training programs that had been developed and enormous responsibility for Sarah and her team. Success would demonstrate that integrated operations could be effectively deployed against real-world threats. Failure could result in catastrophic consequences and potentially discredit the entire program. As preparations began for what would be the most complex military operation of Sarah's career, she understood that everything she had learned and developed was about to be tested against adversaries who had specifically prepared to defeat the best capabilities that traditional military training could produce. The operation would require not just tactical excellence, but the ability to think and act in ways that transcended conventional military frameworks. Success would depend on applying systematic analytical thinking to generate solutions that were simultaneously innovative enough to surprise sophisticated adversaries and practical enough to be executed under extreme pressure. But perhaps most importantly, the operation would determine whether the revolutionary approaches to military training that had begun with Sarah's performance at Coronado could successfully address the complex threats that defined modern warfare.
The operational planning for the counterterrorism mission represented the most complex military coordination that Sarah had ever experienced. Unlike her previous operations, which had involved small teams operating with tactical autonomy, this mission required integrating multiple specialized units while maintaining the analytical flexibility that made integrated operations effective. The terrorist organization had positioned itself across 3 different countries, using a network of cells that appeared to operate independently while maintaining sophisticated coordination mechanisms. Intelligence reports indicated that the planned attacks were designed to occur simultaneously, creating maximum psychological impact while overwhelming traditional response capabilities. The challenge isn't just preventing the individual attacks, explained Colonel Mitchell during the mission planning briefing. It's disrupting the entire network in ways that prevent them from adapting their plans or shifting to alternative targets. Sarah studied the intelligence map showing the geographic distribution of terrorist cells and their planned targets. The pattern revealed something that traditional tactical analysis had missed. The terrorists weren't just planning coordinated attacks. They were creating a complex system where each cell's success depended on specific timing relationships with the other cells. They've designed their operation as an integrated system where disrupting any individual component could potentially cause cascade failures throughout the entire network, Sarah observed. But that also means the system has systemic vulnerabilities that could be exploited to disable the entire operation. This insight transformed the operational planning from multiple separate missions to a single integrated operation where success depended on understanding and manipulating the relationships between different components of the terrorist network. Instead of trying to prevent each attack individually, the integrated operations approach would focus on disrupting the systemic coordination that enabled the attacks. Sarah's team for the mission included personnel who had completed advanced integrated operations training, along with specialists in cyber warfare, psychological operations, and advanced technology. The team composition reflected the multidisciplinary approach that was essential for success against sophisticated adaptive threats. Master Sergeant Rebecca Torres, a former Army Ranger who had excelled in integrated operations training, would serve as Sarah's primary tactical coordinator. Her combination of combat experience and analytical capabilities made her ideally suited for operations that required both traditional military skills and innovative problem-solving. The key to this mission is maintaining system-level awareness while executing tactical operations, Torres observed during team preparation. We need to understand how our actions against individual targets will affect the overall terrorist network. Dr. James Park, a civilian contractor with expertise in network analysis and systems theory, provided the analytical framework for understanding the terrorist organization's structure and vulnerabilities. His insights into how complex organizations maintained coordination under pressure proved crucial for developing disruption strategies.
The terrorists have created redundant communication systems and alternative coordination mechanisms, Dr. Park explained. But redundancy also creates complexity, and complexity creates opportunities for systematic disruption if you understand the underlying organizational principles. The mission's first phase involved deploying to positions where the team could observe and analyze the terrorist network's real-time operations. This intelligence gathering phase was essential for confirming theoretical analyses and identifying specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the operational phase. Sarah's observation of the terrorists' actual coordination mechanisms revealed something that intelligence reports had missed. The organization was using communication methods that combined traditional electronic systems with behavioral patterns that created additional coordination channels. This hybrid approach made their network more resilient than conventional analysis had suggested. They're not just communicating electronically. They're using environmental modifications and behavioral patterns to create coordination signals that wouldn't be detected by standard surveillance methods, Sarah reported to the command center. This discovery required adapting the operational plan to address coordination mechanisms that were more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. The terrorists had essentially created a communication network that operated on multiple levels simultaneously, making it extremely difficult to disrupt using conventional methods. But the discovery also revealed new opportunities for exploitation. The complexity of the terrorist coordination system created dependencies that could be manipulated to create false signals and disrupt their operational timing. By understanding how the system worked, Sarah's team could potentially cause the terrorists to coordinate their own failure. The operational phase began with Sarah's team initiating carefully coordinated disruptions across multiple components of the terrorist network simultaneously. Instead of trying to prevent individual attacks through direct intervention, they focused on manipulating the coordination signals that enabled synchronized operations. Using cyber warfare capabilities to introduce false timing signals into the terrorists' electronic communications while simultaneously modifying environmental markers that the terrorists were using for behavioral coordination, Sarah's team created systematic confusion that disrupted the precise timing relationships that were essential for the planned attacks. The beauty of this approach is that the terrorists are defeating themselves, observed Sergeant Torres as they monitored the results of their initial disruptions. By trying to maintain coordination in a system that's receiving contradictory signals, they're creating delays and errors that cascade throughout their entire operation. The terrorists' response to the systematic disruption revealed both the sophistication of their planning and the effectiveness of the integrated operations approach. Instead of simply aborting their operation when they encountered unexpected coordination problems, they attempted to adapt their plans using predetermined contingency procedures. But their contingency procedures were based on assumptions about how disruptions would occur, and the systematic approach that Sarah's team was using created types of confusion that their planning hadn't anticipated. The terrorists found themselves in situations where their standard responses made their coordination problems worse, rather than better. As the operation progressed, Sarah's team maintained constant analytical assessment of how their disruptions were affecting the terrorist network's overall capability. This real-time analysis allowed them to adjust their approach continuously, maximizing the cascade effects while minimizing the risk that the terrorists could adapt to their methods. We're essentially conducting psychological warfare against their coordination systems, Dr. Park observed. By understanding how they think their own network operates, we can manipulate their responses in ways that create systematic failures. The culmination of the operation came when the terrorist network's coordination system reached a critical failure point where the individual cells could no longer maintain synchronized timing. Without the precise coordination that their plan required, the individual attacks either failed to launch or were attempted with timing that made them ineffective. The success of the operation exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Not only were the planned attacks prevented, but the disruption of the terrorist network was so comprehensive that the organization's operational capability was permanently degraded. The systematic approach had achieved strategic effects that went beyond tactical success.
But perhaps most importantly, the operation had demonstrated that integrated operations methodologies could be successfully deployed against the most sophisticated threats under the most challenging conditions. The approaches that had been developed through Sarah's training and refined through experimental programs had proven effective in real-world applications where failure could have resulted in catastrophic consequences.
The debriefing sessions following the successful counterterrorism operation lasted for weeks as military analysts, intelligence specialists, and strategic planners attempted to understand the full implications of what had been accomplished. The operation had not only prevented catastrophic attacks, but had demonstrated capabilities that would fundamentally change how the military approached complex threats. Secretary of Defense Williams convened a special task force to analyze the operation's methodologies and develop recommendations for integrating these approaches into broader military doctrine. The task force included representatives from every branch of the armed forces, intelligence agencies, and civilian defense contractors. What we witnessed wasn't just tactical innovation, Secretary Williams observed during the task force's initial meeting. It was a demonstration of entirely new categories of military capability that could reshape our strategic approach to national security. The operational analysis revealed that Sarah's team had achieved success by applying systematic thinking to challenges that had previously been approached through intuition and experience alone. Their ability to understand and manipulate complex systems had created opportunities for strategic effects that conventional military approaches couldn't have achieved. The key insight is that modern threats are essentially complex adaptive systems, explained Dr. Rodriguez, who had been brought in to help analyze the operation's theoretical foundations. Success requires understanding how these systems work and developing capabilities to influence their behavior in systematic ways. The terrorists' sophisticated coordination mechanisms and adaptive capabilities had made them essentially immune to conventional military responses. Traditional approaches would have focused on defeating individual components of their network without understanding how those components related to the overall system. But the integrated operations approach had treated the terrorist network as a complex system with identifiable patterns, dependencies, and vulnerabilities. By understanding these systemic characteristics, Sarah's team had been able to create targeted disruptions that achieved comprehensive effects throughout the entire network. The implications for future military operations are staggering, observed General Hayes during her briefing to the task force. If we can systematically develop these capabilities, we could potentially address threats that are currently beyond the reach of conventional military responses. The success of the operation had attracted attention from international allies who were facing similar threats from sophisticated terrorist and criminal organizations. NATO representatives requested briefings on the integrated operations methodologies, and several allied nations expressed interest in participating in joint training programs. The threats we're facing are global in scope and require responses that transcend traditional military approaches, explained Ambassador Catherine Walsh, the U.S. representative to NATO. The capabilities demonstrated in this operation represent exactly the kind of innovation that international security cooperation needs. But the operation had also revealed challenges that would need to be addressed before integrated operations could be implemented on a larger scale. The analytical demands of systematic thinking required extensive training and educational foundations that were not widely available among military personnel. We're essentially trying to create a new category of military professional, personnel who can operate at the intersection of multiple disciplines while maintaining the physical and mental capabilities required for special operations. The selection criteria for integrated operations training had been refined based on lessons learned from the counterterrorism operation. Personnel needed not just tactical competence and analytical capabilities, but also the cognitive flexibility to adapt systematic thinking to rapidly changing operational environments. Sarah's role in developing advanced training programs evolved from experimental participant to primary architect of new educational methodologies. Her insights into how systematic thinking could be applied to tactical problems were being incorporated into curricula that would shape military education for decades to come. The goal isn't to replace traditional military training, Sarah explained during a presentation to senior military leadership. It's to create additional capabilities that can be applied when conventional approaches are insufficient for addressing complex threats. The training programs that emerged from this development process were unlike anything in military education. They combined traditional tactical training with advanced analytical methodologies, creating educational experiences that developed both physical capabilities and intellectual frameworks for addressing complex problems. Personnel who completed integrated operations training demonstrated capabilities that exceeded traditional special operations in measurable ways. They could analyze complex situations more quickly, generate innovative solutions more consistently, and adapt to changing circumstances more effectively than personnel trained through conventional methods. But the most significant impact of the successful counterterrorism operation was its effect on strategic thinking at the highest levels of government. The demonstration that systematic analytical approaches could address threats that conventional military responses couldn't handle changed how policymakers thought about national security challenges. President Martinez authorized the creation of a new military specialization focused on integrated operations, with dedicated training facilities, specialized equipment, and career pathways that recognized the unique requirements of personnel who could operate at the intersection of multiple disciplines. The threats we face in the 21st century require responses that integrate capabilities across multiple domains. The success of integrated operations demonstrates that we can develop those capabilities and deploy them effectively against our most sophisticated adversaries. The broader implications extended beyond military applications to homeland security, international cooperation, and strategic planning. The analytical methodologies that had proven effective against terrorist networks were being adapted for application to challenges ranging from cyber warfare to economic security to pandemic response. Sarah found herself at the center of these developments, helping to design training programs, select personnel for advanced capabilities development, and provide strategic guidance on how integrated operations could be applied to emerging threats. Her transformation from an exceptional individual performer to a strategic architect of new military capabilities represented the evolution of her own thinking about how systematic approaches could address complex challenges. The most important thing I've learned is that individual excellence is only meaningful when it contributes to broader capabilities that can address strategic challenges. The counterterrorism operation had demonstrated that the revolutionary approaches to military training that had begun with Sarah's performance at Coronado could successfully address real-world threats of unprecedented sophistication. But more importantly, it had proven that these approaches could be systematized, taught, and deployed at scale to create new categories of military capability. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, leading the development of integrated operations training for international military personnel, she understood that her individual achievements had become the foundation for transforming how military forces worldwide would address the complex challenges of modern warfare. The story that had begun with instructors quitting rather than continue training an exceptional candidate had evolved into the creation of entirely new approaches to military excellence that would shape national security strategy for generations to come.
5 years after the terrorist network operation that had validated integrated operations as a revolutionary approach to modern warfare, Sarah stood before an international assembly of military leaders, intelligence officials, and strategic planners at the Global Defense Innovation Summit in Geneva. The woman, who had once been an anomaly in Navy SEAL training, had become the architect of military education transformation that was reshaping defense capabilities across multiple nations. The auditorium was filled with representatives from 37 countries, all seeking to understand and implement the training methodologies that had produced unprecedented success rates in special operations and counterterrorism activities. The integrated operations approach that had begun as an experimental response to Sarah's exceptional capabilities had evolved into a comprehensive framework for developing military professionals who could address the complex, adaptive threats that defined 21st century warfare. When I first entered the kill house at Coronado, Sarah began her keynote address, the scenario was designed to be impossible. The instructors wanted to teach humility and the importance of recognizing when a mission should be aborted. What they discovered instead was that impossibility often exists only within the constraints of conventional thinking. The presentation screens displayed comparative data showing success rates for military operations before and after the implementation of integrated operations training. The statistics were remarkable. Units trained in systematic analytical approaches achieved mission success rates that were 30% higher than conventionally trained forces, with significantly lower casualty rates and reduced collateral damage. What we've learned over the past 5 years is that the analytical frameworks developed through integrated operations training create force multiplier effects that extend far beyond special operations, Colonel Torres explained. Personnel trained in systematic thinking approaches contribute enhanced capabilities to every type of military operation. The audience included General Patricia Hayes, now retired from active duty but serving as senior military advisor to the United Nations, who had overseen the initial development of Sarah's revolutionary training approaches. Her presence at the summit represented the international recognition that integrated operations had achieved within the global defense community. The transformation that began with Lieutenant Chen's training at Coronado has fundamentally changed how we think about human potential in military contexts. But more importantly, it has demonstrated that systematic approaches to capability development can address challenges that were previously considered insurmountable. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had transitioned from the Advanced Tactical Development Center to lead the International Institute for Military Innovation, presented research data showing how integrated operations training had influenced military education systems worldwide. Over 200 training facilities across 40 countries had implemented modified versions of the methodologies, creating a global network of military professionals capable of addressing complex adaptive threats. The ripple effects have exceeded our most optimistic projections, Dr. Rodriguez reported. Personnel trained in systematic thinking approaches are not only more effective in their primary military roles, but they're also contributing innovations in logistics, technology development, strategic planning, and international cooperation. The summit included presentations from international partners who had adapted integrated operations methodologies to address specific regional challenges. Israeli representatives described how systematic analytical approaches had improved urban warfare capabilities. British special forces detailed applications to maritime security operations. German military engineers explained how integrated thinking had enhanced rapid deployment capabilities. But perhaps the most significant presentation came from Dr. Lisa Park, the intelligence asset whose rescue had validated Sarah's operational capabilities years earlier. Dr. Park had continued her work in systems analysis while collaborating with military researchers to develop technological applications that supported integrated operations training. The human capabilities that Sarah demonstrated aren't just about individual excellence, Dr. Park explained to the assembled delegates. They represent a systematic approach to problem solving that can be enhanced through technology, taught through structured education, and applied across a wide range of operational challenges. The technological developments that had emerged from integrated operations research included advanced simulation systems that could create training scenarios of unprecedented complexity, analytical software that could model multi-domain tactical problems, and communication systems that enhanced coordination between personnel trained in different specializations. We're essentially creating technological ecosystems that amplify human analytical capabilities, Dr. Park continued. The combination of systematic thinking approaches with advanced technology creates problem-solving capabilities that exceed what either approach could achieve independently.
Sarah's closing address to the summit focused on the future evolution of integrated operations and its potential applications to emerging security challenges. Climate change, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and global economic instability were creating threat environments that would require even more sophisticated analytical approaches. The methodologies we've developed over the past 5 years represent the beginning of a transformation in how human beings can address complex challenges, Sarah concluded. But the real potential lies in continuing to evolve these approaches as new types of challenges emerge. The summit concluded with the signing of international agreements to establish joint training programs, share data, and coordinate operational deployments of integrated operations capabilities. These partnerships represented unprecedented cooperation in military education and capability development. As delegates departed Geneva to implement integrated operations training in their respective countries, Sarah reflected on the journey that had begun with her unconventional performance in Navy SEAL training. The individual achievements that had once seemed impossible had become the foundation for systematic approaches that were enhancing military capabilities worldwide. But the most significant transformation had been personal. Sarah had evolved from someone who excelled at solving complex problems individually to someone who could create systems that enabled others to develop similar capabilities. Her greatest achievement wasn't any single operational success or innovative solution to tactical problems. It was the creation of educational frameworks that could systematically produce military professionals capable of addressing the most challenging threats facing global security. The story that had begun with instructors quitting rather than continue training an exceptional candidate had evolved into an international movement that was reshaping how military forces prepared for the uncertainties of modern warfare. The analytical approaches that had enabled Sarah to succeed in impossible scenarios were now being applied by thousands of military professionals across dozens of countries. 6 months after the Geneva summit, Sarah received notification of her promotion to Brigadier General and assignment as Director of Strategic Innovation for the Department of Defense. Her new role would involve overseeing the continued evolution of integrated operations capabilities while developing applications to emerging challenges that hadn't yet been identified. Standing once again in the kill house at Coronado, now expanded and modernized to support integrated operations training, Sarah watched a new generation of military professionals tackle scenarios that would have been considered impossible just a few years ago. The trainees approached each challenge with systematic analytical thinking that had become standard rather than exceptional. The impossible scenarios aren't impossible anymore, observed Master Chief Rodriguez, now serving as senior instructor for advanced operations training. These trainees are generating solutions that our best instructors couldn't have conceived when you first came through this facility. Sarah smiled as she watched trainees collaborate to solve complex problems that required integrating knowledge from multiple disciplines. The individual excellence that once set her apart had been systematized into educational approaches that could reliably develop similar capabilities in others. That's exactly what we wanted to achieve, Sarah replied. Individual exceptional performance is impressive, but systematic approaches that can enhance human capability across entire populations, that's how you actually change the world. As the training exercise concluded, Sarah realized that her greatest contribution hadn't been any single operational success or innovative solution to tactical problems. It had been proving that human potential was far more expandable than anyone had previously understood, and that systematic approaches to capability development could create entirely new categories of achievement. The instructors who had once quit rather than continue her training were witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented, a demonstration that the limitations most people accepted as fixed boundaries were actually just the constraints of conventional thinking. By systematically challenging those constraints, it was possible to achieve things that seemed impossible within traditional frameworks. The legacy of Sarah's transformation from exceptional individual to systematic innovator would continue evolving as new challenges emerged and new capabilities were developed. But the fundamental insight that had driven that transformation, that systematic thinking to transcend conventional limitations, had become permanently embedded in how military forces worldwide approached the most challenging challenges they faced. The woman who had once stepped into the kill house alone to attempt an impossible scenario had created educational systems that ensured no one would ever have to face such challenges alone again. The systematic approaches she had developed meant that future military professionals would have analytical frameworks, technological support, and collaborative capabilities that could address whatever impossible scenarios they might encounter.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.